The most devastating corporate war in the history of East Coast fine dining started with a $200 steak and an old man in a dirty jacket. This wasn't a story about ingredients. It was a reckoning of respect, a 24-hour collapse triggered by a single moment of profound arrogance. The air in South Beach, Miami, was thick with money and the hum of ambition. The Pearl and the Pit, a temple of high-end dining, stood hushed and gleaming. Just after 7 o'clock, a couple stopped outside its dark oak doors. Arthur Stone, 70, 2 years old, and his wife Evelyn, 68 years old. Arthur wore faded, oil-stained coveralls. A faint scent of brine lingered on him. "Long time since we've been back to this neighborhood, huh, Ev?" Arthur murmured. Evelyn smoothed her simple navy blue cardigan. "I'm excited, Arthur. It looks so grand." They opened the heavy door. The room was dominated by an oak bar and a pristine glass display case showcasing dry-aged steaks and seafood. Every eye in the room snapped toward them. They were an obvious mismatch for the setting. From behind the bar, the owner, A.J. Sterling, a sharp-edged man in his 40s, emerged. His professional facade dissolved instantly as he took in Arthur's worn clothes and Evelyn's practical attire. "Do you two have a reservation with us tonight?" A.J. asked, his voice already cold. "No, we don't," Arthur replied calmly, hoping for 2 seats at the counter. A.J. immediately showed visible difficulty. He gestured vaguely at the bar, where empty seats were clearly visible. "I apologize, sir. We are fully committed this evening. This establishment is strictly by reservation." The lie was palpable. A.J. leaned in, his voice dropping to emphasize the insult. "We maintain a certain atmosphere, a standard of clientele." His gaze fixed pointedly on Arthur's coveralls. Evelyn felt the sting of the insult. "Arthur, maybe we should go," she pleaded softly. Arthur didn't flinch. His eyes weren't on A.J. but on the display case of raw ingredients. His gaze was intense, assessing the quality of the product. A.J. Hostility grew. "Is there a problem?" "Sir, I must insist. A place like this is likely not in your comfort zone." At the far end, the young apprentice, Marco Diaz, 23, cleaning glasses, saw something that made him pause. He noticed the thick calluses and tiny scars crisscrossing Arthur's hands. They were the unique marks of decades of work, with sharp steel a craftsman's hands. Marco hesitantly interjected, "Sir, there is a space right here at the end of the bar." "Marco," A.J.'s voice cracked like a whip. "Stay out of it. Focus on the glasses, apprentice." Marco silenced himself. Arthur, seeing his defense, gave the young man a small, quiet nod of thanks. A.J. sighed, performing his reluctant charity. "Fine, sit down, end of the bar, try to be discreet." He slammed down 2 towels and glasses of water. "Call me when you've decided," he sneered, turning his back. Arthur didn't call him. He stared, unblinking, at the centerpiece of the display, a massive, dry-aged cut of prime ribeye. A.J. was halfway down the bar when Arthur's calm voice stopped him. "Excuse me, chef." A.J. turned, clearly annoyed. "Yes? Have you decided on the iced tea, sir?" Arthur pointed to the steak. "That ribeye, the one in the center." "What about our prime cut?" A.J. challenged. Arthur's critique was clinical. "The humidity control on your aging cabinet is set too high. The primary crust has a hint of gray, not the rich purple it should hold. The flavor is going to be sharper than you think, and the cut needs to be retrimmed before service." The restaurant went silent. A.J.'s face flashed red. Rex, the sous chef, nervously shrugged. "Who does this guy think he is? The Pope of prime rib?" Laughter rippled through the patrons. A.J. seized the moment. "Just because you've cleaned a few gutters doesn't make you a butcher, Grandpa. What are you going to claim next? That you own the company that supplies us?" But Marco felt a knot of dread. He looked at Arthur's hands again. The old man hadn't sounded like he was guessing. He spoke with the absolute certainty of professional knowledge. A.J.'s laughter was loud and confident, but the silence that followed Arthur's critique was the sound of a truth A.J. was too arrogant to hear. The atmosphere at the Pearl and the Pit was now hostile. Arthur's critique of the dry-aged ribeye, the crown jewel of the house, was an unforgivable offense to A.J. Sterling's pride. A.J., leaned close to the counter, his expensive suit jacket straining with suppressed fury. "Let me be absolutely clear," AJ hissed. "We source our meat from Sterling Provisions. They are the most exclusive purveyor on the eastern seaboard. You are sitting here, in a work jacket, questioning my entire 50-year heritage. You have no idea who you're talking to." AJ saw Arthur as a liability, a blight on his curated image. Evelyn, deeply mortified by the glares of the wealthy patrons, squeezed Arthur's arm. "Arthur, please," she whispered, pleading. "Let's just order the chowder. We can leave now." Her only goal was escape. Arthur offered her hand a gentle, reassuring tap. He turned back to AJ, his disappointment quiet but profound. "It is not my intent to embarrass you," Arthur stated, his voice steady. "But when you work with ingredients for a lifetime, you recognize the subtle shift in quality. The steak needs an extra 2 days of airflow. It shows." "Oh, it shows?" AJ's lip curled. "And what have you been working with for a lifetime? A mop? A trash compactor? Do you even know the difference between prime and choice, old man?" Sous Chef Rex mocked them, playing to the room. "Maybe he's one of those undercover food bloggers," the regulars snickered. Marco, the apprentice, was caught in the middle. His entire future depended on AJ, but he couldn't ignore the quiet, powerful sincerity in Arthur's defense of the food. He tried one last time. "Sir, perhaps we should just seat them and take their order. We are running a restaurant," Marco whispered. AJ rounded on Marco, his face cold with rage. "You have crossed a line, Diaz. Stay out of it. You're here to clean up after customers, not decide who is one. Get back to that ice well." Marco swallowed his protest. Just as he bowed his head, he felt a brief, gentle pressure on his knee beneath the counter. It was Arthur's hand, a silent acknowledgement of his courage. AJ finished the verbal execution. "Look, I'll take your order, but I'm not serving my signature aged cuts to someone who clearly doesn't appreciate the decades of work that built this place. I recommend the side salad." Evelyn winced at the final, cutting insult. Arthur calmly reached into his work jacket and pulled out an old, well-maintained flip phone. The mechanical clicks as he began to dial were starkly loud against the restaurant's silence. AJ's patience evaporated. "Who are you calling? The bus station? Your parole officer?" Arthur raised a hand, demanding silence. He held the phone to his ear, his eyes fixed on the aged ribeye display. Then, in a voice that was quiet, but carried the undeniable weight of command, he spoke the words that stopped AJ cold. "Hello. I need to speak to the general manager, please. Tell him it's Mr. Stone." The name itself was common, but the authority in Arthur's voice was not. Marco's heart hammered. He knew Sterling Provisions was the largest, most powerful supplier in the tri-state area. No one addressed their management with such casual command unless they were top tier. But then, Arthur spoke the impossible request. A request so outrageous, it instantly stripped the color from AJ's face, confirming that this was no random crank call, but a targeted, catastrophic professional strike. "Yes, tell the general manager, effective immediately tomorrow morning, to cease all further deliveries to the Pearl and the Pit. That's right, a complete supply freeze." The line went silent inside the Pearl and the Pit. Arthur Stone's quiet instruction to cease all further deliveries hung in the air like an electrocuted wire. A.J. Sterling's face was a mask of bewildered fury. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" he demanded, taking a step toward Arthur. Arthur held up a hand, still focused on the phone. He was responding to the unseen person on the other end of the line. "The reason? Yes. Tell them it's a matter of ethics and disrespect for the product. We cannot maintain a relationship with an operation whose management lacks fundamental respect for labor and clientele." He hung up the old phone and placed it gently on the counter. The metallic click was deafening. He then looked directly at AJ Sterling. His disappointment was palpable. AJ stared, then burst into a loud, artificial laugh that echoed through the stunned dining room. Sous Chef Rex joined in, nervously. The regulars, desperate to break the tension, followed suit. "That's rich, Grandpa," AJ roared, clutching his stomach. "Sterling Provisions? You're claiming to be the guy who just cut off the largest, most powerful supplier in the tri-state area? The man who owns the docks and the delivery trucks? The founder of Sterling Provisions wouldn't be caught dead in those rags." Rex slapped the counter, wiping away tears of laughter. Next he'll say, he's the mayor of Miami Beach. Give me a break, old man. Great performance, though. The patrons chuckled, their judgment confirmed. Arthur was a crazy, desperate old man trying to pull a ridiculous bluff. Evelyn, however, was terrified. She gently took her husband's arm. Arthur, please. Enough. They are humiliating us. Let's just walk away. Arthur gave her a look of deep, abiding sadness. He did not pull away. Marco, the apprentice, felt a cold knot forming in his gut. The laughter felt hollow and wrong. He knew that the founder of Sterling Provisions was named Arthur Stone. He had seen the name on the official paperwork. Arthur Stone. It couldn't be a coincidence. But this man, the one in the soiled jacket, was impossibly humble and old. A.J. sensed the doubt in the apprentice. He pointed a shaking, accusatory finger at Marco. Diaz, you're the one who encouraged this fraud. You saw this man's hands and thought he was a genius? He's a crank. If this man were the founder, why did his own phone call get forwarded to the general manager and not the CEO? It was a sharp, logical question. AJ was using the details of the phone call to tear down the bluff. I need proof. AJ challenged Arthur, his voice dripping with malice. A business card? A corporate ID? Something besides a cheap suit and a delusion. Evelyn's face burned crimson. The demand for proof was the final, humiliating insult. Arthur, let's leave. You don't owe them anything. Arthur slowly pulled his hand away from Evelyn's. He looked down at the old phone, then back up at AJ. A deep sigh escaped him, not of anger, but of utter, heartbreaking disappointment. We will leave, Arthur said quietly. He took Evelyn's hand. But I will provide your proof. It will be delivered to you directly, Chef Sterling. AJ threw his head back, laughing triumphantly. The proof is coming? Wonderful. Maybe a helicopter drop? Go home, you sad man. Don't come back. We don't serve your kind of poverty here. As Arthur and Evelyn turned toward the door, their backs straight despite the shame, Marco stepped forward, unable to hold back. He bowed deeply, his voice barely a whisper. I am sorry, sir. Truly sorry. Arthur paused. He looked at the young apprentice, the only person who had shown him a fragment of respect. Arthur offered him a faint, gentle smile. No, son, he said. You have nothing to apologize for. You are the only honest thing I've seen in this room tonight. The elderly couple walked out into the Miami night. The loud, victorious laughter of AJ and his regulars followed them. Everyone inside was convinced they had won a moral and class victory. But 2 minutes after Arthur Stone walked out the door and disappeared into the night, the house phone rang and the only man who could verify the truth picked it up. His face, Marco noticed, instantly went from victorious red to bone-chilling white. 2 minutes after Arthur and Evelyn Stone walked out, the house phone rang a shrill, insistent sound that sliced through the residual laughter. AJ. Sterling snatched up the receiver, still glowing with self-congratulation. The pearl in the pit, he answered sharply. Yes, how can I help? His voice abruptly stopped. Marco, the apprentice, was drying a glass and watched AJ's face drain of all color. The victorious, arrogant smile dissolved, replaced by a look of sheer, bone-chilling terror. Excuse me? You're calling on behalf of Sterling Provisions? AJ's grip tightened on the phone until his knuckles were white. The general manager called you? But why? The entire restaurant had gone silent. Patrons stopped eating, their forks hovering mid-air. They were all listening, sensing the sudden, drastic shift in the air. Jay stammered, his confident veneer completely shattered. A supply freeze? Complete and immediate? But Mr. Stone said he was calling the GM, not. He paused, listening to the voice on the other end, a voice that was clearly not amused and which held absolute corporate authority. The reason is unprofessional conduct and a failure to uphold quality standards, specifically regarding a dry-aged prime ribeye. AJ's eyes darted frantically to the display case, then to the empty seat where Arthur Stone had been sitting. The old man's critique, which AJ had dismissed as nonsense, had just been validated by the highest authority in the regional meat market. The realization struck AJ like a physical blow. The old man hadn't called the general manager for a favor, he had called him to issue an order. Wait please, AJ pleaded, his voice breaking into a humiliating whimper. At least give us 48 hours. We have reservations. We're celebrating our 50-year anniversary. Mr. Stone, sir. He hung his head, listening to the final, cold dismissal from the other end. With a trembling hand, AJ slammed the receiver down. The noise echoed. Sous Chef Rex approached cautiously. Chief? What was that? Was that the bluff? AJ could only manage a hoarse whisper. His eyes were wide, staring into a newly empty future. No, Rex. No bluff. That was Arthur Stone's son, the CEO of Sterling Provisions, confirming the complete termination of our contract. A patron at the bar suddenly stood up, knocking over his wine glass. Wait a minute. Sterling Provisions. That's who supplies 80% of our seafood and prime meat. Without them, this place is out of business by morning. The old man was the chairman? Panic seized the room. The patrons, realizing they had just mocked the most powerful man in the regional food supply chain, began quietly scrambling for their coats. The high-end meal they were eating suddenly tasted like ash. Rex, his face pale, dropped the knife he was holding. A man in those clothes, he was the chairman? Marco, however, was not surprised. He looked at the dropped knife and then out the window at the empty street. He remembered Arthur's quiet confidence, his knowing glance at the ribeye, and the unique scars on his hands. He wasn't the chairman. He was something much more terrifying. He was the one who had founded the entire empire on the principle of respect. AJ Sterling slumped against the bar, clutching his head, his ambition and arrogance having just cost him a 50-year legacy. Why? Why would he come here like that, just to ruin us? He groaned. Marco knew the answer was staring them right in the face. It wasn't about the steak. It was about the way AJ had treated the man who had built the entire supply chain from the ground up, the man who knew the cost of honest labor. But as the restaurant descended into chaos, Marco was plagued by a more specific, terrifying question. If the man they called Arthur Stone was the founder of Sterling Provisions, then what was his original, deeper connection to this specific restaurant, the Pearl and the Pit? The Pearl and the Pit was in full meltdown. AJ Sterling, the second-generation owner, was slumped, defeated, his 50-year legacy destroyed in under 5 minutes. The supply freeze meant no prime ribeye, no fresh oysters, no business. It's over, AJ whispered, his voice hollow. All of it. He took our entire supply chain. Sterling Provisions accounts for 90% of our premium product. The wealthy patrons, the same ones who had laughed at Arthur Stone, were now rushing out. The atmosphere of exclusivity had been replaced by fear of association. No one wanted to be seen celebrating a victory over the man who controlled the docks. Sous Chef Rex was frantic. What about our reservations for tomorrow? The weekend bookings? We have to call them back. We need to apologize to him. Apologize to who? AJ snarled, wiping sweat from his forehead. The chairman of Sterling Provisions? I insulted his wife and called him a pauper. You think he's going to answer my call? We are blacklisted. Marco, the apprentice, was the only one not panicking about the bottom line. He was haunted by Arthur's critique of the steak. The crust has taken on a hint of gray. The flavor is going to be sharper than you think. It was a devastatingly accurate assessment, proven by the consequences. Marco remembered the subtle, knowing nod Arthur had given him when AJ had called the old man a fraud. He remembered Arthur's hands, the hands of a true butcher, not an amateur. AJ, looking for a scapegoat, fixed his watery eyes on Marco. And you, Diaz, you thought he was a genius. You stood up for him. You encouraged the disrespect. Marco finally found his voice, a quiet but firm protest. Sir, I only said he deserved a seat. And his critique of the ribeye... Shut up! AJ screamed, his anger exploding. It was your sympathy that emboldened him. You broke the staff's solidarity. This is your fault, apprentice. You think you'll ever find another job in this industry after this? The word will be out. You're a liability. AJ's threat was terrifyingly real. In the tight-knit world of high-end dining, a black mark from a respected establishment like the Pearl and the Pit could end a young career before it even began. Marco had just lost everything he'd worked 3 years for. He nodded once, accepting his fate. He didn't argue. He knew that the shame of being fired was better than the shame of siding with AJ's arrogance. He took off his apron. As Marco headed to the locker room to gather his meager belongings, the house was silent except for AJ's desperate dialing of alternate suppliers, all futile. He knew he was already too late. In the small, cramped locker room, Marco picked up the tool he valued most, his grandfather's heirloom shucking knife. It was the tool of a craftsman, and its smooth wooden handle fit his palm perfectly. He looked at the empty shelves, the faded photographs of old staff parties. He was done here. He was alone. But then, Marco realized something that froze the blood in his veins. If the old man, Arthur Stone, was the chairman of Sterling Provisions and the greatest expert on meat and seafood supply, why did he walk into the Pearl and the Pit in a laborer's jacket with his wife, pretending to be a common customer? It meant his visit wasn't a random test. It was personal. It meant Arthur Stone didn't just know the supplier. He must have had an original, deeper, and horrifying connection to this specific restaurant, a secret history that AJ's arrogance had just destroyed. The next morning, the devastation at the Pearl and the Pit was absolute. AJ Sterling stood behind a bar that was chillingly clean. The pristine glass case was empty, no prime ribeye, no oysters, no promise of profit. The cold room was silent. AJ had spent the night making frantic, failed calls. Every rival supplier, terrified of crossing Sterling Provisions, gave him the same cold response. "We can't help you, chef." The restaurant was dead before its doors could open. When Marco Diaz arrived to clean out his locker, the air in the kitchen was thick with failure. AJ immediately targeted him. "You're a liability, Diaz," AJ spat, his voice raspy from stress. "It was your pathetic sympathy that allowed that pauper to think he had the right to complain. You sided with the customer against the house." Marco finally snapped, his quiet fear replaced by righteous anger. "Sir, I sided with quality." He pointed out the flaw in the cut you were too arrogant to see. He was right, and he was the chairman. "I don't care if he was the King of England," AJ roared. "You're fired. Now, get out. You are an apprentice. You have no voice, and you have no future in this business. You should have stayed silent and learned your place." Sous Chef Rex watched from a distance, avoiding eye contact, too cowardly to defend Marco. Marco felt the crushing weight of 3 years of sacrifice vanish. The dream was over. He went to the tiny storage room attached to the locker room to retrieve his sharpening stone. The room was mostly filled with decades of clutter-old menu boards, spare utensils, and boxes of papers that belonged to AJ's deceased father, the founder. As Marco reached for his stone, his hand brushed a dusty, stacked wooden crate. It toppled over, spilling its contents, old receipts, handwritten notes, and a collection of faded black and white photographs. He knelt, quickly gathering the mess. One photo, crinkled and worn at the edges, caught his attention. It was a shot from the early 1970s. It showed the original founder of the Pearl and the Pit, smiling proudly, but it was the person standing next to him that made Marco gasp. The photo showed a young man, perhaps 22 years old, in a clean white chef coat, intensely focused on prepping a large piece of meat. He had the same sharp eyes, the same strong brow, the same profound concentration. It was the spitting image of Arthur Stone. Marco flipped the photo over. Scrawled in faded pencil were 2 names, Master and Apprentice, 1974. And beneath that, Arthur Stone, First Apprentice. Marco's world tilted violently. The man AJ had thrown out, the man he had called a pauper in a dirty jacket, was not just the chairman of the largest purveyor. He was the original, first ever apprentice of this very restaurant. The horrifying truth was now undeniable. AJ Sterling hadn't just insulted a customer, he had publicly humiliated his father's hand, picked successor, and the cornerstone of his own supply chain. Marco suddenly realized that the reason Arthur had visited was not to eat it, was to mourn the death of his master's legacy, and AJ's arrogance had just sealed the final betrayal. The photograph was a punch to the gut. Marco Diaz gripped the faded image. Young Arthur Stone, the future chairman of Sterling Provisions, standing shoulder to shoulder with the revered founder of the Pearl and the Pit, his master. The pencil notation, Arthur Stone, First Apprentice, confirmed the devastating truth. Marco stood in the dusty storage room, the chaos of AJ's firing and the restaurant's collapse suddenly secondary to this historical betrayal. AJ, hadn't just insulted a customer, he had desecrated the sacred memory of the founder and publicly shamed his most devoted disciple. Marco felt a rush of white-hot anger, replacing the despair of being fired. We, meaning AJ Rex, and the snickering patrons had thrown out the one man who had the right to be there. Arthur Stone hadn't come for the food. He had come for a pilgrimage, hoping to see his master's spirit alive in the second generation. He saw only arrogance and disrespect. Marco looked down at his own apron, tossed carelessly onto a chair. All his training, his sacrifice felt invalidated. He wanted to march back out and show AJ the photo, to shove the truth of his stupidity and cruelty in his face. But Arthur's quiet dignity stopped him. The old man hadn't argued. He hadn't sought revenge. He had simply issued an execution order for the business and walked away, a silent monument to his disappointment. Marco packed his heirloom knife and his whetstone, placing the precious photograph carefully inside his backpack. He couldn't leave this truth buried. He couldn't let AJ Sterling simply suffer a business failure. The man needed to understand the true moral and spiritual cost of his actions. He walked out of the back alley and onto the street. The Miami morning felt cold and uncertain. His culinary dream was dead. But a new, more urgent mission had taken its place: atonement. He had to find Arthur Stone. Marco knew the official headquarters of Sterling Provisions was in an exclusive office tower near the docks, a place where a fired apprentice in a worn t-shirt would never be allowed past the lobby. He would have to go there anyway. He pulled out his phone, searching for the address. As he walked toward the bus stop, his mind raced, replaying every moment: Arthur's quiet strength, Evelyn's painful shame, and AJ's venomous insult. "We don't serve your kind of poverty here." The irony was crushing. Arthur Stone, the man who controlled the wealth of the regional food economy, was driven by humility and respect for labor, while AJ, the beneficiary of that labor, had succumbed to pure greed. Marco looked at the address on his phone. He had to go to the source, to face the man whose quiet power had wiped out a 50-year legacy overnight. He had to apologize for a crime he didn't commit but failed to prevent. But as Marco approached the towering glass headquarters of Sterling Provisions, a new, chilling thought occurred to him. Why did Arthur Stone choose to abandon his dream of becoming a master chef, the first apprentice of a legacy restaurant, to start a wholesale supply business? The answer must lie in a tragic sacrifice, a 50-year-old secret that held the key to both Arthur's humility and his ruthless judgment. The address led Marco Diaz to the towering, polished glass headquarters of Sterling Provisions, an immense building on the Miami waterfront. It radiated the kind of cold, quiet power that controlled markets and dictated prices. It was a terrifying place for a newly fired apprentice to approach. Marco felt the full weight of his humiliation. He was dirty, jobless, and clutching a backpack that contained his two most valuable possessions: a grandfather's knife and a 50-year-old photograph. He took a deep breath and walked into the sterile marble lobby. He approached the granite reception desk, where a security guard and a sleek young receptionist regarded him with immediate suspicion. "I need to see Mr. Arthur Stone," Marco requested, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. The receptionist didn't even look up. "Which Mr. Stone? The CEO is not receiving unscheduled visitors. Do you have an appointment?" "The chairman," Marco clarified. "Arthur Stone Sr. And no, I don't have an appointment. Tell him I'm from the Pearl and the Pit. Tell him I have something that belongs to him, from 1974. The mention of the specific date and the legendary original restaurant cut through the receptionist's corporate indifference. She typed something, her eyes widening slightly, and spoke quietly into her headset. The security guard watched Marco with renewed interest. A moment later, she looked up, her expression a mixture of surprise and confusion. "The chairman will see you immediately. Take the express elevator to the penthouse suite, 28th floor." The immediate access was shocking. It confirmed Marco's belief. The visit to the Pearl and the Pit was far more than a simple inspection. Marco ascended in the silent glass elevator, the city unfolding below him. He was going to meet the man who had the power to end careers, yet who chose to live with the quiet dignity of a laborer. Stepping out onto the 28th floor, Marco was met not by a secretary, but by Evelyn Stone. She looked composed and gentle, dressed impeccably but simply. She offered Marco a warm, familiar smile that instantly calmed his racing heart. "Marco, isn't it? Thank you for coming," Evelyn said softly, her eyes full of recognition. "Arthur was hoping you might. You were the only one who showed us kindness last night." She led him down a short hall to a vast office with panoramic views of the entire waterfront, the docks, the shipping lanes, the core of the Sterling Provisions empire. Arthur Stone was standing by the window, no longer in stained coveralls, but a tailored suit. The change of clothes could not conceal the familiar steady strength in his posture. Arthur turned, and his gaze was exactly as Marco remembered it, intense, honest, and profoundly knowledgeable. "Mr. Stone," Marco began, bowing deeply, tears suddenly stinging his eyes. "I came to apologize for his cruelty, for the insult, for failing to speak up with conviction. He humiliated you. I was fired for defending you, but it was deserved. I should have been louder." Arthur walked forward, stopping Marco's apology with a single gentle motion. "Rise, Marco," Arthur said, his voice calm and warm. "You apologize for a sin that is not yours. You are the only one who recognized the cost of real labor. You are the only one who saw my hands, not my jacket." Marco produced the faded photograph from his backpack and placed it on the desk. "I found this, sir, in the storage room. I understand now. You were the first apprentice. You built this legacy." Arthur and Evelyn looked at the photograph. A wave of profound sadness washed over Arthur's face. He picked it up, running a thumb over the image of his younger self. 50 years, Arthur murmured. 50 years since my master gave me his blessing. He taught me everything about the cut, the quality, the heart of the business." Evelyn put a hand on her husband's arm. Arthur was heartbroken last night. He saw that the integrity his master built the place on had been replaced by that boy's arrogance. "But, sir," Marco pressed, his eyes desperate for the answer to his biggest question, "if you were the first apprentice, the most passionate chef, why did you leave the bar? Why did you walk away from the craft to start the supply company? Why did you sacrifice your dream to run a warehouse?" Arthur looked out over the enormous sweep of the harbor, his empire stretching to the horizon. His eyes held the weight of a monumental choice made half a century ago. "Marco," Arthur said, turning back, his voice dropping to a low, powerful confession, "my master taught me that quality is everything. But I realized very quickly that the master could only control the quality of the food within his four walls. I left the bar," Arthur confessed, the weight of the secret finally released, "because I realized that controlling one counter wasn't enough. I needed to control the entire supply chain. I sacrificed my own dream of being a chef so that every honest chef could have access to true quality, but I never let go of the tools." He turned to a polished, closed cabinet on the wall, reaching toward it with the same scarred hands that AJ had mocked. Marco watched, heart-pounding, as the chairman of Sterling Provisions slowly opened the cabinet, revealing the sacred tools of his abandoned craft tools that Marco realized he was about to be entrusted with. The closed cabinet was polished mahogany, almost hidden in the vast modern office of Arthur Stone. As the chairman of Sterling Provisions slowly opened it, the contents were revealed, not corporate awards, but the pristine, revered tools of a craftsman. Inside lay a collection of master-grade cutlery, specialized shucking knives, a massive gleaming bone cleaver, and a full set of Japanese-style artisan blades, all perfectly maintained and nestled in velvet-lined slots. These were the tools of the chef Arthur Stone had sacrificed to become the chairman Arthur Stone. "My master told me," Arthur said, his voice quiet, "that the hands that choose the ingredient are just as important as the hands that cut it. But I watched too many good chefs fail because they couldn't get true quality. Corruption, shortcuts, greed. So 50 years ago, I made a choice. I would control the supply to preserve the heart." Marco finally understood the monumental scale of Arthur's life. He hadn't given up his dream. He had amplified it, sacrificing the spotlight of the bar for the responsibility of the entire market. He was the protector of quality for the whole eastern seaboard. Arthur reached into the cabinet and carefully removed a knife. It wasn't one of the massive, impressive cleavers, but a slender, perfectly balanced shucking knife with a smooth, dark wooden handle. It was obviously ancient, worn by decades of use. This belonged to my master, the founder of the pearl and the pit, Arthur said, holding the knife like a relic. It was the tool he gave me when I became his first apprentice. It represents the promise, absolute respect for the product and the customer. He turned to Marco. When A.J. Sterling threw me out, calling me a pauper, he wasn't insulting me. He was confirming that my master's restaurant was dead. The spirit of humility, the respect for the craft, it was gone. You, Marco, were the only flicker of that light left. Arthur placed the master's knife into Marco's trembling hands. The weight, the balance, the history, it was overwhelming. You were fired for standing up for quality, Arthur continued, his eyes locking with Marco's. You recognized my hands and you dared to speak up, even when it cost you everything. That, Marco, is the true heart of a chef. That is the heart my master tried to teach me. Sir, Marco struggled to speak, clutching the sacred tool. I don't know what to say. I just want to learn. I want to be worthy of this knife. Evelyn, standing beside them, smiled gently. My husband has been searching for 50 years. He left his dream behind. He needs someone to carry the knife again. Arthur nodded. You asked why I walked away from the bar. I walked away because there was no one left to trust. But now there is. Marco, I am offering you an opportunity, not a job, but a continuance of the legacy. The Pearl in the Pit is finished, but I still have the finest, most exclusive products in this city. I need a chef, a craftsman who understands the product as deeply as I do. I want you to work here, not just as a chef, but as my personal final apprentice. You will learn how the entire system works, from the dock to the purveyor's analysis, to the final cut. Marco looked from the knife in his hands to the powerful gentleman who had chosen him. He realized that his dream hadn't died. It had been relocated to the center of power. He was being offered a chance to become not just a chef, but the guardian of quality. Marco accepted the heirloom blade, sealing his destiny. He was about to begin the most exclusive and rigorous culinary apprenticeship in the world, unaware that the final phase of his training would involve the total, absolute dismantling of his former master's failed empire. The closed cabinet was polished mahogany, almost hidden in the vast, modern office of Arthur Stone. As the chairman of Sterling Provisions slowly opened it, the contents were revealed, not corporate awards, but the pristine, revered tools of a craftsman. Inside lay a collection of master-grade cutlery, specialized shucking knives, a massive, gleaming bone cleaver, and a full set of Japanese-style artisan blades, all perfectly maintained and nestled in velvet-lined slots. These were the tools of the chef Arthur Stone had sacrificed to become the chairman Arthur Stone. My master told me, Arthur said, his voice quiet, that the hands that choose the ingredient are just as important as the hands that cut it. But I watched too many good chefs fail because they couldn't get true quality. Corruption, shortcuts, greed. So, 50 years ago, I made a choice. I would control the supply to preserve the heart. Marco finally understood the monumental scale of Arthur's life. He hadn't given up his dream. He had amplified it, sacrificing the spotlight of the bar for the responsibility of the entire market. He was the protector of quality for the whole eastern seaboard. Arthur reached into the cabinet and carefully removed a knife. It wasn't one of the massive, impressive cleavers, but a slender, perfectly balanced shucking knife with a smooth, dark wooden handle. It was obviously ancient, worn by decades of use. This belonged to my master, the founder of the Pearl and the Pit, Arthur said, holding the knife like a relic. It was the tool he gave me when I became his first apprentice. It represents the promise, absolute respect for the product and the customer. He turned to Marco. When A.J. Sterling threw me out, calling me a pauper, he wasn't insulting me. He was confirming that my master's restaurant was dead. The spirit of humility, the respect for the craft, it was gone. You, Marco, were the only flicker of that light left. Arthur placed the master's knife into Marco's trembling hands. The weight, the balance, the history, it was overwhelming. You were fired for standing up for quality, Arthur continued, his eyes locking with Marco's. You recognized my hands, and you dared to speak up, even when it cost you everything. That, Marco, is the true heart of a chef. That is the heart my master tried to teach me. Sir, Marco struggled to speak, clutching the sacred tool. I don't know what to say. I just want to learn. I want to be worthy of this knife. Evelyn, standing beside them, smiled gently. My husband has been searching for 50 years. He left his dream behind. He needs someone to carry the knife again. Arthur nodded. You asked why I walked away from the bar. I walked away because there was no one left to trust, but now there is. Marco, I am offering you an opportunity, not a job, but a continuance of the legacy. The Pearl and the Pit is finished, but I still have the finest, most exclusive products in this city. I need a chef, a craftsman who understands the product as deeply as I do. I want you to work here. Not just as a chef, but as my personal, final apprentice. You will learn how the entire system works, from the dock, to the purveyor's analysis, to the final cut. Marco looked from the knife in his hands to the powerful gentleman who had chosen him. He realized that his dream hadn't died. It had been relocated to the center of power. He was being offered a chance to become not just a chef, but the guardian of quality. Marco accepted the heirloom blade, sealing his destiny. He was about to begin the most exclusive and rigorous culinary apprenticeship in the world, unaware that the final phase of his training would involve the total, absolute dismantling of his former master's failed empire. 3 months into his apprenticeship, Marco Diaz was a different man. The old, timid apprentice was gone, replaced by a focused, knowledgeable craftsman. He was no longer just learning to cut, he was learning to sustain. One quiet afternoon at the small 4-seat counter, Arthur Stone watched Marco preparing a complex shipment analysis for a major New York restaurant. Arthur's face held the profound calm of someone who had resolved a deep conflict. That young man, A.J. Sterling, Arthur murmured to Evelyn, who was sipping tea beside him. He was so focused on the image of the legacy, he forgot the substance. He thought the price tag defined the quality, not the effort. He thought the money bought respect. Evelyn agreed softly. He didn't know you can't buy the kind of respect you earned, Arthur. Arthur sighed, a sound of old, quiet disappointment. I kept that knife for 50 years, Ev. I kept my master's teaching that you must always honor the person who works, regardless of their station. I walked into his bar in my work clothes because I wanted to see if the second generation still understood that basic principle. It was a test of the soul of the restaurant. Marco overheard the conversation. He realized that Arthur's simple act of showing up in a worn jacket was an ultimate lesson in humility, a lesson AJ failed spectacularly. Marco was now responsible for auditing all incoming products. He had Arthur's trust, but he hadn't yet been officially introduced to the broader world of high-stakes culinary figures. He was still the hidden weapon. Marco, Arthur called, drawing his attention. You have surpassed my expectations. You now possess the technique and the knowledge of the supply chain. But the true test of a chef is not just in the making, it's in the judgment. Arthur placed a local newspaper clipping on the counter. It was a follow-up piece on the failure of the Pearl and the Pit. It mentioned the sudden, devastating supply cut by Sterling Provisions, but hinted at deeper internal strife. A.J. Sterling has lost everything, Arthur stated flatly. But he still holds a powerful card, the secret of what really happened. He lost the money, but he hasn't lost the bitterness. And bitterness can be poison in this industry. Marco felt a flicker of anxiety. What do you mean, sir? He's finished. He may be finished, but he is still a chef who knows how to talk, Arthur explained. He can spread rumors, accuse us of corporate sabotage. He needs to be neutralized, not financially, but ethically. Marco looked at the heirloom knife, the weight of the master's legacy heavy in his hand. He knew what was coming. The final reckoning couldn't happen in the sterile quiet of the Sterling headquarters. It had to happen in the messy human world where the original sin was committed. Marco, Arthur said, his eyes unwavering, there is one final step for your apprenticeship. You must face your past. You must go to your former master, A.J. Sterling, and offer him the one thing he cannot buy, the truth. The stage was set for a confrontation, the disgraced former owner facing his former apprentice, who now held the key to his family's biggest secret, a secret that would forever change AJ's understanding of ruin and redemption. Marco Diaz found A.J. Sterling exactly where he expected, in the desolate back alley of the permanently closed The Pearl and the Pit. It was late evening. A.J. Enzer's OPs was alone, leaning against the cold, locked service door. He looked defeated, his tailored suit now rumpled, his arrogance replaced by a weary bitterness. Marco approached him quietly. He was wearing clean, simple clothes, a contrast to his former apprentice uniform, and carried his backpack containing the master's heirloom knife and the photograph. AJ looked up, his eyes bloodshot. He recognized Marco instantly. "Look what the cat dragged in, the reason I'm selling the yacht. Come to gloat, Diaz? Did Arthur Stone send his little spy to deliver the final insult?" "No, sir," Marco said, standing his ground. "I came for myself. I came to tell you the truth, because you need to understand why you failed." AJ sneered. "I failed because the chairman of Sterling Provisions decided to play a vindictive class war game. He had a personal vendetta. You think I don't know that?" "It wasn't a vendetta," Marco stated firmly. "It was a test of final inspection by his master's first apprentice." Marco unzipped his backpack and pulled out the faded, black and white photograph. He didn't hand it over, he simply held it up, letting AJ, "Look at the image of the founder and the young Arthur Stone. That man you threw out," Marco explained, his voice low and serious, "wasn't just the chairman of Sterling Provisions. He was the first apprentice of your father, the founder of the Pearl in the Pit. He helped build this place 50 years ago. He was your father's trusted successor." AJ's jaw went slack. He stared at the photograph, then back at Marco, his expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and then a horrible, sickening realization. The old man's critique of the stake, the authority in his voice, the quiet pain when he walked away, it all clicked into place. "No," AJ whispered, shaking his head frantically. "No, my father never spoke of a first apprentice named Arthur Stone. He only spoke of the business, of me taking over." "Because Arthur Stone made a sacrifice," Marco countered, "the truth now a weapon. He walked away from the bar, the dream of being a master chef, to found Sterling Provisions. He realized he couldn't control the quality of the food here, he had to control the quality of the food everywhere. He sacrificed his life's passion so that your father, and later you, would have the best product in the city." Marco paused, letting the weight of the enormous sacrifice settle on the ruined owner. "When he walked in here, sir," Marco continued, "he wasn't judging the price, he was judging the soul. He saw his master's legacy replaced by your contempt for the working man. You insulted his wife, you called him a pauper, and you showed zero respect for the hands that built your entire business. You didn't just fail a test, you betrayed your own bloodline." AJ suddenly stumbled back, clutching the wall. The true scale of his hubris was overwhelming. He hadn't been ruined by an enemy, he was destroyed by his own ignorance and pride. "My father's friend," AJ muttered, tears welling in his eyes. "The man who supplied us for 50 years. I humiliated him. I threw out the cornerstone of my own house." Marco watched the complete collapse. The ambition and arrogance that had blinded AJ were finally gone, leaving only bitter regret. "He taught me one last lesson," Marco said, raising his hand to show the scars on his own knuckles. "That respect for the product and the labor is the real currency. I was fired for defending that respect, and now I am his final apprentice." AJ looked at Marco, seeing not a disgraced worker, but a figure of quiet, powerful redemption. Marco was the one who had passed the test. Marco had delivered the truth, but the story wasn't finished. The redemption was his, but Sterling still needed to know the final fate of the restaurant, the actual building itself, a final, ironic twist that would confirm the permanence of his failure and the eternal nature of Arthur Stone's legacy. AJ Sterling stood frozen, the faded photograph of the original apprentice, Arthur Stone, clutched in his trembling hand. The full weight of his colossal mistake, the betrayal of his own heritage, had finally crushed him. "He never mentioned it," AJ whispered, his eyes fixed on the young Arthur in the photo. "My father. Why didn't he tell me that man was the cornerstone of our whole system?" "Because your father trusted you to uphold the spirit, not just the name," Marco replied, his tone now one of empathy, not judgment. "Arthur Stone didn't need recognition. He needed respect for the craft he sacrificed, and you showed him none." Jay looked up at Marco, truly seeing his former apprentice for the first time, a young man who had lost his job but gained an empire's trust. "You're working for him now. He took you in." "He took in the only person who saw his hands," Marco confirmed. "He took in his master's legacy." AJ slowly looked around the empty alley, at the locked doors of the building that had been his inheritance and his ruin. "So this is it. The Pearl in the Pit is a memory. What happens to the building now?" Is he going to tear it down and put up a luxury condo? Marco hesitated. This was the final, ironic twist. Arthur Stone had hinted at the true fate of the physical structure. No, Marco said. He told me the building will be sold. But he made sure the new buyers signed a specific non-compete clause. They can't open a restaurant. AJ frowned, confused. So it just sits here, an empty monument to my failure? No. Arthur Stone said he ensured that the physical space would be repurposed to reflect the true cost of labor, Marco revealed. The Pearl in the Pit, where you charge $200 for a steak you didn't even respect, is going to be converted into a specialized educational facility, a technical school for aspiring food supply workers, focusing on sustainable sourcing and distribution. The irony was devastating. The temple of AJ's arrogance was becoming a school of humility dedicated to teaching the very workers he had disdained. He's turning it into a trade school, AJ breathed, a harsh, defeated laugh escaping him. He's making sure the workers he respected will occupy the space I desecrated. Marco nodded, realizing Arthur's final quiet victory was a lesson for the entire city. He closed the bar, but he opened a school. He honored his master's dream by ensuring the next generation understands the true value of the food before it even reaches the kitchen. AJ looked down at the photograph again, the bitterness finally dissolving into profound regret. I am sorry, Marco, he murmured. I was a fool. I hope you make him proud. Marco simply nodded. He had delivered the truth and witnessed the humbling of his former master. His mission of atonement was complete. The old chapter was finally closed. Marco turned and walked away, the heirloom knife in his backpack symbolizing the new one. He was heading back to the docks, where his true mentor awaited, unaware that Arthur Stone had one final, profound gesture planned, a public acknowledgement that would solidify Marco's new status as the true heir to the master's legacy. The next morning, at the sprawling Sterling Provisions headquarters on the waterfront, the atmosphere was charged. Today was the company's quarterly leadership meeting, a gathering of the region's most powerful seafood and meat distributors, chefs, and industry titans. Arthur Stone, dressed in a sharp suit that commanded respect, stood at the podium. Beside him, Evelyn smiled warmly. We have concluded a period of necessary restructuring, Arthur announced to the room, his voice steady. Our decision regarding the Pearl in the Pit was not about profit, it was about principle. It was a lesson. Integrity must always be the primary product. He spoke briefly about the restaurant's permanent closure and its pending conversion into a technical training center, drawing quiet nods of approval from the industry veterans. Then, Arthur paused and looked toward the back of the room. But from that disappointment, he continued, we found a profound hope. We found the only person who still embodies the spirit of my master. He gestured for Marco Diaz to join him on the stage. Marco, wearing a new, crisp white chef coat, the official uniform of a Sterling Provisions culinary consultant, walked forward, the weight of the moment pressing on him. This is Marco Diaz, Arthur declared, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. He was recently the apprentice at the former Pearl in the Pit. He was fired for daring to stand up for quality and respect, even when facing the arrogant ruin of that management. The room buzzed with surprised murmurs. Many of the distributors knew Marco's former boss, AJ, and the rumors surrounding his downfall. Arthur's eyes, however, were fixed on Marco. Marco is not just a chef. He is the guardian of our legacy. He is the one person I trust to uphold the standards I established when I left the bar 50 years ago. Arthur then reached into his pocket and retrieved the master's heirloom shucking knife, the tool he had entrusted to Marco. He presented it publicly, holding it high for everyone to see. This blade, Arthur announced, his voice ringing with emotion, belonged to my master. It is now the symbol of the Sterling Provisions culinary ethos. I entrust it to Marco, not as a gift, but as a mandate. He will be the new face of quality assurance. He will be our chief culinary analyst. The promotion was unprecedented for a young apprentice. Marco, overwhelmed, accepted the knife. He looked out at the room filled with the men and women who controlled the market, the men whose opinions AJ had valued more than respect, and realized he now stood on equal footing. Your work, Marco, Arthur concluded, will be to ensure that no honest chef is ever again sold a product that compromises their integrity. You will be the master's voice, speaking on behalf of every fisherman, every butcher, and every decent cook in the region. Marco simply nodded, gripping the knife, his eyes shining with purpose. He knew the dream he thought he had lost was now exponentially larger than he had ever imagined. The public anointing was complete. Marco was now the official heir to Arthur Stone's integrity. The only thing left was the future, the quiet daily commitment to upholding the sacred trust of the master's legacy, away from the neon lights and the arrogance, in a new small space dedicated only to truth. 3 months later, the chaos was a distant memory. The massive glass headquarters of Sterling Provisions now housed a discreet, 4-seat sushi bar tucked into a private corner near the executive offices. This small space, immaculate and serene, was Marco Diaz's new kitchen and classroom. Here, Marco Diaz, the former apprentice who had been cast out, now held the master's legacy. He served only Arthur, Evelyn, and the occasional high-level culinary client Arthur trusted. He worked not for profit, but for the truth of the ingredient. Every morning, Arthur Stone and Marco reviewed the day's best catches. Marco, wielding the heirloom shucking knife, dissected and analyzed the product, applying the knowledge of the purveyor with the skill of a chef. "That scallop," Arthur would instruct calmly, "it's from a colder current. The texture will be slightly tighter. Adjust the cut to reveal the sweetness." Marco would nod, executing the precise adjustment. His technical skill was superb, but his philosophy was everything. He understood that the most expensive product meant nothing without respect for the labor that brought it to the counter. Evelyn Stone acted as his patron and mentor, often bringing him tea and offering gentle encouragement. "We are so proud, Marco," she said one afternoon, watching him work with quiet focus. "You carried the kindness we needed, and now you carry the master's heart." They were talking about the old restaurant. The headlines were definitive. The Pearl and the Pit was permanently closed. The building was already undergoing conversion into the technical school. Arthur had mandated a lasting monument to the value of labor. "Arthur," Marco asked one day, looking up from his work, "what happened to A.J. Sterling and Rex?" Arthur shrugged, indifferent. "They are part of the old story, Marco. They are suffering the consequence of ambition without ethics. The industry corrects itself. Our story is about the future." He then looked at Marco with a penetrating, proud gaze. "It's time, Marco. You have the technique, the philosophy, and the network. I have taught you everything I learned at the bar, and everything I learned at the dock. It is time for you to establish your own counter." Marco's eyes widened. "My own restaurant? Where?" "Not a restaurant," Arthur corrected, a slow smile spreading across his face. "A counter. A small, perfect place where the only thing that matters is the quality and the respect. You will carry the heirloom knife, and you will teach others that lesson. The cut and the concept must be flawless, but the respect must be absolute." Evelyn leaned forward, placing a hand on the counter. "And when you open your doors, Marco, we will be your first customers. We will be your investors, your suppliers, and your family." Marco, deeply moved, looked at the quiet counter, the perfect slices of aged meat and fresh seafood before him, and the gentle faces of the couple who had saved his dream. He finally understood the entire journey. Arthur's sacrifice had preserved the supply for 50 years, and AJ's arrogance had created the necessary void for the legacy to be passed on. Marco was the one who would finally fulfill Arthur's original dream. The master's heart had traveled 50 years, through the docks and the supply chain, and had finally found its home in the hands of a young man who understood that the true price of the cut was paid in respect, not currency. Marco nodded, a profound sense of purpose filling him. "I will. And the first thing I will teach is that you never judge the quality of a man's heart by the clothes on his back." The final chapter was written. The drama of wealth and class had dissolved, leaving only the pure, quiet sound of a master's knife on a cutting board, signaling the start of a true legacy.